Good evening. I'll let everyone get their seats. Welcome to the 15th Annual Legislative Town Hall on Intellectual, Developmental, and Other Disabilities. I am Christina Botero, Guardianship Coordinator, with the Arc Pikes Peak Region. I am so happy to be standing in this venue looking at all of you, and equally as thrilled to have our virtual audience in attendance. I've been involved with this town hall in some form or another since its inception. The committee often talked about offering a way for people to participate virtually. It only took a global pandemic to make this a reality. We are grateful to El Paso County for the use of Centennial Hall and for their assistance with the technical support, allowing our remote audience the opportunity to participate. Thank you, Blake. I would also like to thank Marcy and Chris from Sign Language Network for providing sign language interpretation. We have a few housekeeping matters to go over. For those of you in attendance at Centennial Hall, if you are parked in the parking garage directly west of the building, please make sure you pick up a voucher for the parking from Tammy Ingram, who is at the table up there. She's waving. So you will need your ticket that you got when you came into the parking garage. That goes into the kiosk first, and then you put in your voucher so that you can get out of the parking garage. I'm guessing that will be pretty important to all of you tonight. The restrooms are located near the east entrance of the lobby. If you need any assistance finding them, please just have one of our volunteers help you locate those. We have agendas and ground rules at the same table with the parking vouchers and Tammy. We ask that you please review the ground rules and adhere to the time frame allowed for each person. We also ask that your questions only be relevant to the topic area being discussed. You will have the opportunity to ask a question for each topic area outlined in the agenda. Our moderator will help direct your questions to the appropriate official. There will be time at the end of the agenda for any questions you may have unrelated to the agenda topics. If you would prefer to write your questions on a 3x5 card, just lift your card or your hand, and one of our volunteers, Bruce up there, will make sure that you get a card and a pen to write down your question, and he will run them to our moderator. For those of you participating virtually, you can type your questions into the chat feature. That is the little bubble that looks like it has kind of squiggly lines on it. If you click on that, you'll be able to type in your question. The chat is not on a secure network, so please do not type in any health protected information or confidential information in that. If you have specific questions, you can just put in your information in the chat, your name and a telephone number and email address, and we will reach out to you to have you ask that question. The evening is for our elected officials to hear from all of you. They too have rules. For all of you up there, this is our lovely assistant Liz, who will be timing you all this evening. She has cards, green, yellow, and red, and so she will let you know where you're at on time. So you don't need to worry about that. She'll do that for you. We are here tonight for all of you, so please make sure that you have your questions asked and answered, because it is your time. It's about people tonight. It is my pleasure now to welcome Wilfred Romero, the Executive Director of the Arc Pikes Peak Region.
Thank you, Christina. And thank you to all of our panelists. I can't tell you how happy I am to see all of you here and to see really all of our chairs full. As Christina said, my name is Wilfred Romero. I'm the Executive Director of the Arc Pikes Peak Region. For those that aren't familiar with the Arc is part of the largest civil rights organization in the United States, the Arc of the U.S. We provide advocacy services in the areas of public policy, education, criminal justice, and community. We have 86 individuals that we serve through our guardianship program. We provide education to individuals with IDD, their loved ones, caretakers, and criminal justice professionals in general. And we also provide social opportunities to address the issues that impact individuals with disabilities and with isolation. I also got to encourage you to shop and support the Arc thrift stores. They are the purpose behind our chapters and the way that we do our work with little or no cost. We want to thank again all of those that are here tonight, especially our Legislative Town Hall Committee members. Bruce Mayberry is the Executive Director of Dungarvin. Christina Butero, Guardianship Coordinator for the Arc. Representative Lois Landgraf with the TRE Board. Julie Melendez, TRE Board. Dina Hardy, TRE Board. Colleen Head Batchelor, who's the CEO of TRE. Julie White, Marketing and Communications Manager. Ryan Kuiper, Service Coordinator and Training Manager. Tammy Ingram, Executive Assistant. Sarah Jack with Sarah B. Jack and Associates, who's also a past board member for TRE. We'd like to recognize all of the board members from TRE and the Arc Pikes Peak region that are able to join us. From TRE, again, Representative Lois Landgraf, Dina Hardy, Vice President Dan Meyer, Dave Paul, Teller County Representative, and Lori Heisinger. From the Arc Pikes Peak region, April O'Neill. Our special guests are Colin Lachlan, Deputy Office Director of the Office of Community Living, Steve Durham, State Board of Education, 5th Congressional District, and Kevin Hodges, Assistant County Administrator of El Paso County. Excuse me. And now I'd like to introduce Colleen Batchelor.
Thank you, Will. Good evening. I'm Colleen Batchelor with the Resource Exchange. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. We really appreciate it. And we have such a wide variety of elected officials with us tonight, so thank you. The Resource Exchange is one of many partner organizations in this Pikes Peak region working to support individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, as well as a wide range of other disabilities. We've been advocating for independence and inclusion since 1964 when we were first named a community-centered board. We've more than doubled our number of people served since 2019 because we became the first organization in Colorado to also serve individuals under the single entry point in Colorado, which is a movement happening in other areas now. With that increase, we have grown to more than 9,000 individuals served in 2020. Our priority throughout the extraordinary circumstances presented by COVID-19 and the pandemic that ensued was really making sure that we were advocating for the people we serve to have accessibility to the services that they needed to continue. We did this using increased technology and expanded use of telehealth and more hybrid solutions for programs. And many of you are joining us tonight because of that useful technology. And we used this technology really effectively to continue to hold this town hall last year where it was completely virtual. TRE takes our role seriously in contributing to thoughtful public policy and legislative advocacy. And we thank you for your participation in events like these that move us toward our goal for empowering people, strengthening families, and building inclusive communities. Ed Bowditch is our moderator tonight. Ed has a master's degree in public policy from Harvard University and an undergraduate degree from Colorado College in political science and history. His professional experience includes having spent 3 years on staff at Legislative Council, 7 years as senior staff to the Joint Budget Committee, and 1 year as Deputy Director of the Governor's Office of State Planning and Budgeting. He possesses an unparalleled familiarity with the state budget process. We're really proud to maintain a professional paid relationship with Ed as our TRE lobbyist, so our voice is heard and at our state capitol on behalf of the people we serve. Please help me welcome Ed to begin the process.
Thank you for that introduction. Good evening, everybody. And I'd like to say this is my 4th or 5th year as MC. I've been down to these events quite some time. I've never had a sidekick. I've never had a bouncer, so I'm pleased to have former Representative Landgraf here with me at my table. If any of you have questions about what happens to you after your elected career is over, you might end up sitting at a table with me. But instead of introducing all the panelists right now, I think you can introduce yourselves as you answer questions so we can get right into the format. We're going to talk first about housing. And if anybody has any specific questions on housing, you can come to the microphone or send a card in to one of the individuals. We've got one question. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, you've got the cards back there if anybody has any questions. We've also got about close to 30 people, and maybe the number is growing, who are online, who are watching this as well, and we'll be getting questions from them. The big issue for housing for individuals with disabilities and individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities is affordable and accessible housing. Affordability in housing is something I'm sure in all of your roles, perhaps not you, Member Durham of the State Board of Education, but for everybody else, the other elected officials here, housing affordability is certainly something that is on the top of everybody's agenda. And what's happened in the Denver metro area where I live, and certainly down here in Colorado Springs, we were talking earlier about the lack of affordable housing. It gets even worse when you talk about affordable and accessible housing. There are issues with the local governments about accessibility with curbs, sidewalks, and things, and then there are issues of accessibility in terms of in the house. Does anybody want to start off, any of our elected officials, like to start off just talking about what can be done, what can the elected officials do at the city, local government, county, or state level about to promote affordable and accessible housing? Representative Pico, thank you so much. And go ahead and you'll need to click on your microphone to make it work. Introduce yourself and please jump right in. Thank you.
Thank you. State Representative Andy Pico is also on City Council for a while. So I've had a little bit of experience with both of those issues. The fundamental point on housing, if you want more affordable housing, you have to build more of it. And that just goes into the basic idea of supply and demand. There's a shortage of housing compared to people who want it. Therefore, that tends to drive the price up pretty quickly, regardless of whatever the costs are. But then when you get into some of the other issues of, well, accessibility, you already have a lot of requirements in place. Whether or not they have all been followed is kind of one of the issues that gets into enforcement. I know the City of Colorado Springs, from the time I was on there, that was an issue that we struggled with, is ensuring that we had accessibility where it was required and what it made sense to do so. Basic things such as sidewalks, ramps on sidewalks. And the city has done a tremendous amount to try to catch up with what that infrastructure was required to be. We didn't have a lot of that in place over the years, and we were doing a lot to catch up. That's on the public side. Part of that as well are the regulations that are required that go into how you build housing and all of those things. So all the requirements that get levied on a builder will drive his costs up. That will cut into the ability to be able to sell that, and that's kind of one of those things that you've got to be able to balance the cost of building to the ability to sell and do that. Now, as we're escalating in price rise right now, as I said, alluded to before, there's a significant shortage of housing in every market. It goes across the board, and that's been escalating the price pretty quickly. So an awful lot of building is trying to go to catch up to that, and all the requirements that go into that are all different things that at every level we have certain influence on being able to do. So that's kind of an introductory to the subject. It's very complex. Senator Heise and I are both on the Affordable Housing Task Force in the interim committee and trying to struggle through this summer with precisely these issues.
Thank you. I'd like to jump to Councilmember Williams. Thank you for joining us. I know you're here for a bit tonight, but go ahead and jump right in.
Thanks. So first, thank you for doing this. Thank you for having us here, and I apologize for having to leave early. I also need to disclose that I am a huge fan of the Resource Exchange since 2 of our daughters went through the speech therapy programs there, including the one now getting a PhD in chemistry at Princeton. So having said that, let me talk about a couple things that we're doing at the city. We actually just had a community meeting today from 1:30 till 5, talking about affordable housing and some of the issues. We're sponsoring a forum and working with a coalition of people from across the community. But let me talk about 2 issues that I think are particularly important. One of those is waiving the sales tax on the building components in affordable housing. Right now, that's a possibility depending on who is actually building the affordable housing, but it's not, that waiver is not available to everyone. And so one of the things we're looking at the city is trying to figure out how to make that available to more people and more builders so that everyone is incentivized to do that. That sales tax, the sales and use tax, is about roughly half the cost of a house that you're paying that sales tax on. By avoiding that, we can make it more affordable and make it easier for someone to get financing for it. The second item we're doing is with Colorado Springs Utilities. We've approved, in concept, 2 significant expenditures. One of those provides $10 million to get trunk lines out to housing across the community, and the other is to specifically use $2 million to help defray the tap fees, water development, and water resource fees for affordable housing. So those are a couple things that we're doing at Colorado Springs and Colorado Springs Utilities right now. Thank you.
Thank you. And when you say waiving the sales tax, that's the city sales tax.
City sales tax, county's been part of that discussion, and I had a discussion with at least one of the members of the state legislatures here tonight about the possibility of doing that at the state level as well.
And that was exactly what I was going to suggest, that we have all these legislators who are just dying to think of great bills to run this year. But if the state is in a Tabor refund situation, waiving tax revenues, you're not taking money away from school finance or something if the state is already collecting, in effect, too much money. Anybody else on this topic? Yes, Commissioner.
Yes, I'm County Commissioner Stan Vanderwerf, and also the chair of the board and also the chair of the Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments. I've got several topics. I'm going to be very brief on them, so it's really more about introducing the topic than really getting into any depth. The first one is broadband. Might sound a little unusual, but really, when you've got an ability to communicate, work remotely, talk to your doctor remotely, these kinds of things, you can go to places where homes can be more affordable and maybe still get more services than would typically be done. And we're doing a lot of work in the county on getting broadband out to our rural communities. Also in 2027, we enacted tiny home legislation to try to produce affordable homes in approximately the $100,000 range. Unfortunately, we've not had a lot of people take us up on that, but we're hopeful that there will be more. I appreciate Representative Pico's comments about supply. That's really ultimately the best solution. I can tell you El Paso County issued record permits for single-family and multifamily homes in 2020, and we're on target to do that again in 2021. Also support the senior homestead exemption. I think that's very important. That's for older folks, some of whom might have mobility issues. And Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments has an area agency on aging, and we kept checking up on our clients during COVID to make sure that they were okay. And then one other quick item is construction defect reform, which is a complicated topic, but actually really important. That makes it difficult for builders to actually deal with multifamily housing that's with home ownership tied to it because of what lawyers have been able to sue about, and that is too much of a topic to discuss here. County does a lot of ADA work as well. And then the last one that I think is very important, there is another solution that we should always be working on, and that is families, strengthening families, helping people live and work with their family. Sometimes this is absolutely the best answer for anybody that has any form of disability because their family cares for them. And so helping families be healthy and robust, I think, is a very important topic of conversation, and in particular, a public policy topic of conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Senator Heisey.
Learning how to operate these mics. I've never been here before. This is Dennis Heise, clerk to the board. State senator. And as Senator Representative Pico mentioned, we are both on the Affordable Housing Transformational Task Force. But I wanted to let everyone know that you do have representatives up there, and they have been reminding us that the IDD community is one in particular that is in need of affordable housing. And while we do have what sounds like a lot of money to the non-governmental types, $400 million to spend, that could easily be spent without ever leaving the Denver area. So we're doing our best to make sure that that money goes as far as possible, is leveraged as much as possible, and goes to all parts of the state.
Thank you, Ed. State Representative Terry Carver. And I just wanted to tag on to what State Senator Heise just said. I'm in my 7th year, and next year will be my 8th year in the House. And an ongoing concern that I have seen throughout my time in the House, up in the state legislature, is, in my view, a lack of equitable distribution throughout the state, and in particular to El Paso County, for CHAFA tax credits. CHAFA is one of the main tax provisions we have in Colorado to facilitate, incentivize developers to do affordable housing, low-income housing, to expand that supply. Now, I will say to CHAFA's credit that the distribution has been less lopsided for the Denver area in the last couple of years, but it could still stand improvement. So when we are looking at up at the state level, how resources are distributed throughout the state. El Paso County is the most populous county in Colorado, and we have, I believe that will continue. So whether we are talking about the task force that is looking at how to allocate $400+ million for affordable housing, or how we look at how these significant tax credits that go to developers and the projects that are approved, we need to continue to have strong oversight to ensure that El Paso is getting its fair share. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Others on housing? Yes, Commissioner, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Cammie Bremer, El Paso County. I wanted to segue there with excellent comments by the representative that here in El Paso County, we are looking at creative solutions and creative ways to come alongside those state and federal funds that are coming down on this huge issue of housing affordability right now. And where I sit also on the El Paso County Housing Authority Trust Fund Board, and what we try to do is take a look at those who have qualified for CHAFA funds and other incentives, and also make sure that those projects become viable, that they're in the communities that can support them, that they are along transit lines. We are trying to coordinate all of these things that become an important part of independence for anyone with disabilities. And I think Councilman Williams spoke about utilities perhaps looking at incentives and reducing tap fees for affordable housing developments. But as county commissioners, and particularly on that board, we're trying to be much more strategic about pulling together all of these different resources. None of us, none of our entities that we represent have a single golden ticket solution to this really big problem. If we can find the ways to pull these programs together, look at different ways to be creative and make sure that there are affordable housing developments in the right parts of town, in the right, with access to jobs and work and child care centers, all of these things that go towards healthy living. We're trying to be much more strategic about just being very big picture about pulling it all together.
Commissioner Bremer, I really appreciate the way you framed that as a multi-tiered issue. It affects everybody on the panel, as well as all the other issues we're talking about tonight. So I think we will use that to segue into transportation. You mentioned the importance of affordable housing, where people live, where people have access to transit, and all of that. So I'd like to change just a little bit and talk about transportation. The needs for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and transportation needs is critical. If you don't have that, you can be isolated, and no one wants that. We want people with intellectual and developmental disabilities to live in their communities with strong families, as Commissioner Vanderwerf said, but access to all of the things that make up a community. I'd like to ask Councilmember Thompson to talk a little bit about some of the transportation issues and solutions that they have been working on in Fountain. So, Councilmember, thank you. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you very much. How long do I have? Oh my goodness, 2 minutes, and there went 10 seconds. Okay. Thank you so much for having us here tonight. My son is a client of Resource Exchange, and I bought a new car about 70 days ago, and I already have 5,000 miles on it. Does that tell you how much transportation issues that we have in our community? And we all are aware of the transportation shortages that occurred during COVID. We suddenly had transportation for our people in our home one day, and the next day we didn't have transportation for them. They didn't have activities to go to. So I am in the world with you. I completely understand it. From my point of view, and I know each one of us it is individual. We got some really great things going on in Fountain. And one of the things that I am especially proud of is a transportation collective that has come about between Invita, Silver Key, and the Fountain Valley Senior Center. That has been specialized transportation. It's always been underfunded and very tough to deal with. We all deal a lot with specialized transportation. When our new director, Jolene Hausman, came on, I handed her a box of puzzle pieces and said, I got a bunch of puzzle pieces for how to figure this out, but I don't even know what the picture is supposed to look like. Here you go. Jolene got together with the other people from Silver Key and Invita, and they made policy changes, they shared information, and I have some staggering numbers that were just put out the other day. When they began working together, sharing their information, sharing their routes, sharing their dispatch facilities, in January of this year, 46 people were provided with rides that would have been left behind in the past because they would have called one provider and been turned down. But now if you call Silver Key and you can't get a ride with there, they will immediately say, we can't provide a ride for you, but Invita, we can book you on them. Would that be okay with you? They are providing transportation for seniors over 65 and disabled people under 60. That is where my son falls into them, and they have been a lifesaver at my house this last year. So I can take my son to his classes, but I get a ride home for a donation to them from his classes. Save me thousands of miles. 45 people in January, 187 in February, up to 682 people in the month of June were provided rides who obviously would have been left behind. I haven't even gotten to Fountain yet. Oh my goodness. Okay, come back again.
And the program you mentioned is just in Fountain at this point?
No, this is everywhere. The Invita, Silver Key, and Fountain Valley Senior Services, they provide rides all throughout El Paso County.
Okay.
Right.
So
if you call one of them, get signed up with their system, then if they can't provide a ride when you call, they do require advance. It's not same-day transportation. You do have to book with most of them 24 to 48 hours in advance.
So it's not quite on demand, but it is.
Right.
It sounds like it's working well in your situation.
Yes, and this again is specialized transit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. That was a very comprehensive response and introduction. We appreciate that. It's always good to hear
I got
hear
more.
good news.
I got more.
jump right in. I think we can.
I just wanted to share some exciting things we're doing in Fountain, because we now have for 2 years now, we have a full-time person, Rosa, who is our ADA certified coordinator, and we have taken the approach of every project in the city, it works through the ADA coordinator. So if we're working on an intersection, it has to go through Rosa. So if there's anything that needs to be done at that intersection, it's done when that intersection is fixed. If we're working on a park, then that park equipment is going to be ADA accessible. The reason that got started is I had somebody take me to a park and show me this beautiful new piece of equipment, and I looked at it and I started crying. No kids with a disability could get on that piece of equipment, and it was brand new. And so I went to our city manager and I said, we need to do better. We need to figure out how to address this as a whole city solution so that every department that is doing anything has to run through our ADA coordinator. And they worked towards it. They got her trained and certified, and we're really excited about that. One of the things Rosa just did was she hired a company called Eureka Vision. They're coming into our city. They're going to go through all 190 ADA ramps, and they have brand new technology. They're going to, within about a month, have that every ramp in the city looked at, imaged, and back to the city, and we can begin that as part of our ADA plan for what we're going to do as part of the transportation and within the city. And she has also gotten grants to put in 5 ADA certified bus stop covers, so that those are all in, and we're really excited about that. And we also worked through Mountain Metro so that when the Health Center South opened up at day 1, we had an ADA accessible bus stop there, and we could pick up people in security, bring them over the railroad tracks so they didn't have to try to run across Highway 85 in a wheelchair, crutches, or something, with children, and then get to the Healthcare South. And that was in place the day that Healthcare Center opened down there. So I think we're really, really trying to make advances the best of our ability, and it just takes a lot of money and time, but I'm really excited about being part of some of those changes happening in Fountain.
Thank you for that comprehensive explanation of what's going on in Fountain. I would like to recognize Representative Geithner, who's here with us briefly, out in the audience right now. A man of the people, thank you for being here tonight as well. And right now on the online, we have Colin Lachlan, who wants to comment. He's from the Office of Community Living. You there, Colin?
I sure am. Can you hear me, Ed?
Yes.
All right. I appreciate the invite tonight, and I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. My name is Colin Lachlan, and I'm from the Office of Community Living at the Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing. I'm the Deputy Director for the office, and my colleague Bonnie Silva sends her regards. I did want to jump in on this, and I'm not sure if it was intentional, but it certainly, I think, aligns with what we're seeing at the department, which is the two most, I would say, the two largest barriers to true independence and interaction with the community is housing and transportation. And I think when we see that year over year, when we ask people a satisfaction survey about the services they're receiving, we typically have those 1 and 2 in terms of what is their biggest barrier to interacting with the community. So the department in the last year and a half has taken specific steps to try to remove some of those administrative barriers. This last year, we had House Bill 1206, want to make sure I had that right, which actually removed some of the requirements that previously sat over the Public Utilities Commission to make it easier while still ensuring the health, safety, and welfare of individuals, but make it easier for people to access transportation. I think one of the other things that we're doing with the American Rescue Plan Act funds that we have is, many people, and I believe the council member there had talked about this, many people have a specialized transportation that they utilize. And so within the vehicle modification benefit that we allow under certain waivers, we're trying to allow some additional utilization of funds.
Is now joining.
So can you guys still hear me?
Yes, keep going.
Sorry about that. So we're allowing actually for people to ask for additional monies under those waivers to make sure that they can, if they need it, access resources to fit their, whether it be a car or a van, to be able to make that specialized transport happen for the the individual and their family. And then finally, we are looking at trying to partner with additional organizations, additional communities, additional special districts, whatever that is, trying to figure out how can we better serve those individuals? How can we make sure that transportation is not a barrier? So that includes things like Lyft and Uber, who we're in conversation with, but also trying to get down to the nitty gritty and talk with communities who may have come up with their own approach, unique approach to trying to meet those needs. So we're always open to those conversations, and we look forward to some additional partnerships as we look to spend some of the American Rescue Plan Act money.
Colin, one follow-up question. This
Sure.
is Ed Bowditch, the lobbyist moderator.
Yep.
You mentioned Lyft and Uber. Lyft and Uber are going to work in some cases, but they're probably not right for everybody or for every. What would it take? Because we hear that every year at this town hall meeting. Why can't we use Lyft and Uber? So what would it take to be able to use Lyft and Uber in those instances where it makes sense?
Yeah, so right now it's largely an issue of billing, but I think first and foremost,
I'm sorry, an issue of
billing.
Billing.
Yeah, so they, for those of you who've taken an Uber or Lyft, during certain times of the day, the pricing can get pretty significant in terms of what that, being in rush hour or after a game or whatever that might be. And so as Medicaid has this fixed cost fee-for-service reimbursement, there's some difficulty there. We think that we've actually cracked a bit of a nut there about how we can have some flexibility in that rate. But it also, I think, and you mentioned this right away, Ed, was that it does leave out a portion of the population, individuals in wheelchairs, for example. There aren't that many Uber or Lyft drivers who drive around a van that can pick up individuals in a wheelchair or have specialized equipment. And so what we need to do is create incentives for Uber and Lyft. We need to look at our rates. We need to look at our mileage bands, and we need to make sure that at the end of the day, we do have some flexibility for providers who would like to get into that. And so what we're hoping to do is partner with them over the coming months to better understand how we can fit our sort of square peg in the round hole when it comes to Medicaid pricing, but also make sure that there's people with specialized vans that can come into that.
Thank you for joining us. Commissioner Vanderwerf.
Yes, thank you very much, Commissioner Vanderwerf. Again, I did want to actually mention that for Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments, PPACG, in 2021, they became a designated recipient of funds through the Federal Transit Administration specifically for specialized transportation. And that funding is used to enhance the mobility of seniors and people with disabilities. They also receive funding from the State Unit on Aging. And when they receive those funds through applications from organizations and companies that provide specialized transportation, they can come to PPACG, apply for those funds. It's a competitive process, but that actually is a device and a vehicle in order to fund specialized transportation throughout El Paso County, Teller County, and Park County, since PPACG represents all three of those counties. But you can contact PPACG if you want to find out what the eligibility criteria is and how your project or proposal might be scored. And then there is a time frame within which those proposals can be submitted and ultimately get funded. But PPACG does play a specific role in specialized transportation, and I just wanted to bring that up.
Thank you. Other comments on transportation? I know it was transportation, the larger issue of transportation finance took a huge effort last year in the legislature for the overall financing of the system. Representative Bradfield.
Thank you. And my name is Representative Mary Bradfield, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this forum this evening. I am not coming with a question. I'm not coming with a solution or a suggestion. I am seeing that many of the options here that are on the sheet for transportation have the word Medicaid. And right now, there's the Medicaid program obviously has some significant problems in their payout and their payout in a timely fashion. And that worries me when we set up something and it has to be paid through Medicaid. I don't see that this can be sustainable. And so I think we need to be looking at other avenues of financing, whether it be community, county, maybe state allocated funds, rather than going through that medical process. And I'm just putting that out as a suggestion simply because in another committee, I am seeing exactly the fact that people are stopping services because they're not getting paid. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Anything else on transportation? Okay, moving on to supports and services. I'd like to pause just for a minute here. The funding for individuals with developmental disabilities, intellectual and developmental disabilities, are done, as Representative Bradfield said, on a Medicaid waiver basis. Most of the funding. It's a partnership between state and federal governments. Each side pays roughly 50%. It's not the regular Medicaid program where once you qualify or if you meet the criteria, you automatically get funded. It is a waiver program. So when the state runs out of money, we develop a waiting list. Some people have waited for years to receive full services on the waiting list. In the last 15 years, the state has made a lot of progress on addressing the waiting list. Really through the efforts of legislators and the governor's office, going back to when Governor Ritter was in office and continuing through the last few governors. But we had an interim committee, I think back in 2007. Then Representative Bob Gardner was on the interim committee. It was my first year lobbying, representing the Resource Exchange and a few other community center boards. And I remember the committee chair told him his bill was irresponsible because it would have allocated too much money to the waiting list. Well, the bill established a savings account in effect. It's the only area in state government that I'm familiar with where if monies go unspent, they're supposed to go into the savings account to be used for future needs for that same purpose. The legislature never lets those kind of savings accounts be established. If the money's unspent, it goes back into the general fund. But despite being told that he was being irresponsible in that first committee, I think you may have been in your first or second term back then, but I figured if anybody's going to start calling him names, that's just going to make him mad. Well, lo and behold, he got the bill through, and the fund was after that known as the Bob Gardner Fund. Representative Lois Landgraf did the End the Wait List bill. That meant that, yeah, we didn't have all the money in the first year to end the waiting list, but the state needed to come in and present a plan on how much it would cost and over how many years to end the waiting list. And that really focused both the state, that was always a good partner, but it focused the state and the legislature on the waiting lists. Up until that time, if you asked multiple people how many people were on the waiting list, you got different answers. But I think since then, and this is not to impugn the departments or the governors or the legislatures, but it really helped focus everything. And there were a lot of other people involved in those bills as well. But supports and services, Senator Gardner, how about if I just hand you the microphone and you can just talk about what you think and some of the progress we've made and where we still need to go on this?
Well, thank you, Ed. I was thinking as I was sitting here, I think this is my 12th or 13th attendance at this town hall meeting, and I appreciate every year the opportunity to be here and speak with you, and in a lot of ways just focus my attention back on supports and services for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, because there are dozens and dozens of things that compete for our attention. I behave irresponsibly very often, according to some, so, and with fairly good results. And that particular bill that created a fund that got sort of informally named for me, which created a revolving fund, happened not because I knew very much about what I was doing in my second session of the legislature, but because the community center boards and the alliance made it possible to educate me and to give me the tools to make that happen. So I just want to make clear that it matters that you're here, and it matters what you do, and it matters how we go at this. I have a sense that we need some breakthrough ideas and things, because the reality is in 2007, when that interim committee occurred, we had a very long wait list. It is 2021, and we have a very long wait list. We manage it better. We have made great strides, and a lot of people in the community will say, with some truth, that there's always going to be some level of wait list for a variety of reasons. A few years ago, I introduced a bill that died a rather brutal death. Was another one of my ideas. I thought it was very responsible, but it depended on who you talked about. To give CCBs the ability to do what we have in the education system in Colorado, which is the ability to ask for waivers as to how you provide services and how you do it. Because one of the things I hear about Medicaid, one of the things I hear about supports services for IDD is that there's duplication, there are things that are just inefficient, there's a federal standard, there's a state standard. I'd really like to think about that idea again, but I'm going to tell you a real truth about that. That bill died because the community itself, and by that I mean CCBs, ARCs, families, providers, everybody took a different view about it, and the bill died by a death by 1,000 cuts, frankly. This community, all of you, there is no stronger voice in the Capitol when you are all together on something, and there is no more ineffective, I want to be a little harsh here, but there's no more ineffective voice whenever you divide yourselves about what you want to do. So I think the next big step in services and supports in Colorado are going to be around, if we took this project on, would be around more Medicaid waivers, more experimentation, and you have to be careful about that, but waivers from state services requirements, not in the area of anything that affects the rights of consumers, families, and so forth. But we've got to change the paradigm of what we do. And the same is true for the Medicaid program generally. That's a tough discussion to have. I had that discussion for a couple of years a little while ago, and there wasn't anybody who was engaged any place, anywhere in the Medicaid program that didn't say, yes, it's long overdue, we've got to do things differently, but everyone was so invested in their own particular piece of the puzzle that you just couldn't get it done. I think there was a missed opportunity for a lot of Medicaid reform in Colorado at the time, but the wheel will turn and that will come again, and I hope, hopefully in the time I'm in the General Assembly. More than you wanted to know, but there you go.
Thank you, sir. Other comments on services and supports for individuals? Yes, Representative Bradfield.
Thank you again. This summer I am a part of the Behavioral Health Transformational Task Force, and we are needing to spend, it won't be difficult, probably won't even be enough, a significant $550 million from the federal government, and it has been allocated for behavioral health and substance abuse. I think when it comes to behavioral health, mental health, I think we'd all agree that Colorado does not have a good track record. And I certainly would like to have any suggestions you have for repairing the broken system and what we can do as a task force to improve it, and understand that improvements need to come in. It won't be overnight, let me just put it that way, that we change things, but sometimes it's hard to change the course of a river when it's flowing. You need to gradually alter that, and that's what will happen here, I am sure. So I'm just putting that out there. Please feel free to give contact to me, reach out if you have an idea that you feel that should be a part of this task force. Thank you.
Couple of things. So the City of Fountain has a program called Home Safe that was developed through our police department. And so if you're in the City of Fountain or have a family member there, you can get a form from the police department and you submit it ahead of time, and they have a lot of questions, and it's for any age person. You put a photo in, and then you describe things about your special needs person that they might need. Are they attracted to water? Would they be scared of loud noises? All sorts of questions. You fill it out ahead of time, and if you call 911 and you tell them the name of that person, that will automatically populate onto the computers and into the officers that are responding to that call. So they instantly have a photo and have some places maybe that person might be attracted to, or places they might go to or go to hide. The second thing that Fountain just recently did, and I know the county has a couple of these teams, is the Beacon team. So if someone in your home is having a mental health crisis or other issues, they are dispatched with a police officer that's specially trained and a licensed social worker. And the results we are getting for that, for the first couple of months ours has been out there on the streets, are absolutely phenomenal. They are putting people, instead of using the jails for someone who's having a mental health crisis or using the emergency room, the officers that respond initially and make the scene safe are able to go back out on the roads, and then this team comes in, offers services. Sometimes they do direct admits into the hospital. Sometimes they can talk them down and do a variety of things. But those are some things we're doing for support services in the City of Fountain that I am really, really excited about. And I think that's the way we're seeing our community people ask us to go. Those teams are very expensive to run. They can't all be out there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So I'm sure the county would be happy to have more funding for another Beacon team. We are actually trying to figure out funding for our second Beacon team because we're so tremendously excited about the results. So I don't know if Colorado Springs has anything like that or not, but fantastic results. So if you hear of a Beacon team or a similar name in your community, support it, get behind it, speak up at city council or different meetings to say this is important to our community, because instead of our people being manhandled and scared and creating more trauma for the entire family, they can come in and diffuse the situation and take care of it a lot calmer. But we need support from the community to keep these programs going.
Thank you. We do have a comment from the chat room. We need to first look at all the mental health facilities and the discrimination our individuals with IDD are faced with every day. So those, certainly those legislators who are on the interim task force that has the name I won't be able to remember, the interim task force, that's something to keep in mind about how to make sure that the individuals in this community are getting all their services. Both Senator Gardner and Representative Bradfield mentioned the importance of family members contacting elected officials. A number of years ago, I was working with a group of parents of people in the IDD system, and I said, each of you, contact your local legislator. And I had one gentleman come up to me at the end and say, I don't agree with her politically on anything. And I said, well, this is the great thing about this issue. It is a nonpartisan issue. So go ahead and contact her. He called me a week later and he said he emailed her. This was in the summer. She got back to him that day and said, let's meet for coffee. Tell me about your son's issues. And suddenly he became her go-to person on all these issues. And she would call him and say, I've got this bill up at the Capitol. This is Representative Conti, one of your colleagues. I've got this bill. She went on to become a county commissioner in Arapahoe County. I've got this bill up. Tell me what this would do to your community. And I said, that's an example of an extremely dedicated legislator who had no background in this area, but once she was reached out to, she looped him in, and she would take him to meetings, and he became her, guidance, provided guidance to her on all these issues. So contact your local elected officials, as I always say. Be very polite. Be brief, don't send them 40 pages, but tell your story and tell why something is important to you, because they need to hear that. Steve Durham, when I first started at the Capitol, you had already been there a number of years, and I think you were ending your legislative career right as I started on staff down there. You've been there in a variety of roles. As we move to education, you've seen the talking points and not the talking points, but the policy points in here. Special education, I think the school districts will always tell you, gosh, it's underfunded. We're not blaming Steve Durham here in the State Board of Education, but education, special education, it's underfunded. It needs to be refocused. The teams need to work together. The expulsion rate for students with IDD continues to grow at an alarming rate. The number of training hours required for general education teachers to include training is an issue. Steve Durham, I'd like you to just kick off with your thoughts on all of these issues, and we'd love to hear your perspective. And thank you for joining us. I don't remember that we've had folks from the education community here, but it's great that you're here tonight.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me say that in terms of if there is lack of funding, the legislature is to blame, and I'm more than happy to pass that along to them. We allocate.
Thanks.
No problem. I always want to be helpful. We occasionally allocate some of the money that's appropriated, but quite often it's appropriated directly for specific purposes. I think the issues you've raised create and are in conflict with a number of other objectives that I think makes an immediate solution somewhat difficult. First of all, the support or lack thereof for mental health in schools has been noted, but $550 million of federal money has been allocated to the problem, not all of which will, of course, be spent in schools, but a significant amount will, and hopefully that'll go some distance to solve the problem. I would note that I think the increase in mental health problems among school-age children can really be traced to the isolation created by some of the draconian COVID restrictions. And the best thing that we can do, and that the State Board has tried to do, is encourage a return to in-person learning at every possible opportunity with the minimum of quarantine and other barriers. And I think that will go a long way to alleviating the problem generally as children return to their normal environment. So I hope there's some success there. Perhaps the biggest problem with the issues you raised is requiring general education teachers to increase training in this area. I can tell you that is a difficult task for the State Board. We do have some authority over those issues, but there are only so many hours in a day and so many hours that you can force a teacher to participate in additional learning activities. And I personally believe that those requirements need to be targeted to those that are on the firing line. For example, we have had our number one priority at State Board has been literacy. And we have increased, at some controversy, the requirements for some teachers to take additional hours for training in childhood literacy. But we have limited that, for example, to grades 1 through 3 elementary school teachers and teachers that are specifically designated as literacy specialists. It would not be cost-effective and time-effective on behalf of teachers who don't teach reading, who are teaching in grades 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, to force that upon them, and you find significant resistance to those from the education community. And I understand, I mean, there are only so many hours that we can reasonably expect teachers to do that. So I think the training needs to be targeted to those who are most likely to have direct contact. And finally, I would like to comment on the restorative.
Before you get to the finally, let me just do a follow-up, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but on that topic, I have heard, and people talk about the teacher, the coming teacher shortage. Well, it's already here in certain districts and certain topics and in much of rural Colorado. And I know you have rural areas in El Paso County, and then we also have Park and Teller counties that we serve. One of the issues that has come up is for a teacher who is not certified special ed to become certified as a special ed teacher, that there are that the state board should consider an easier pathway for that sort of transition. So I don't know on that topic if that has come up.
I think that's a good idea. I have not seen a specific proposal, but I do believe it is important that if people wish to change direction in their careers, they already have a significant amount of training and interaction. So we should make that easier. And if you have specific proposals, I'd be happy to take a hard look at it and see what we could do. I think it's important to note one thing in your last item here on, or not the last item, but the item on restorative justice. We've conducted surveys on why teachers leave the profession. And you would think that perhaps the number one reason is salary. And it's important, but it's not the number one reason. The number one reason in exit interviews is they don't feel safe in the classrooms. I don't think the restorative justice model is working, and it is clearly making teacher retention more difficult. And we really need to be able to have teachers feel safe in the classroom, and if that means doing harsh things like removing disruptive or threatening students, then I think we owe the teachers that measure of safety. So that's one that I simply can't agree with. I just think it makes it much harder to retain and to recruit teachers if they have to deal with those kinds of issues. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you again for being here. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. I'm Tom Strand, and I'm on the Colorado Springs City Council, and currently I'm the president of the City Council, the 9 members on City Council. I'd like to comment on education in 2 regards. Currently, both Commissioner Cami Bremer and I serve on the Colorado International Language Academy Board of Directors for that school. It's a K-5 language immersion school. And prior to that, I served for 6 years on the District 11 School Board. And, I've got a background in the issue concerning special education. My deceased wife, Lynn Strand, was the author of a program called Touch Math. She was a speech and hearing therapist and a special educator. And so the 43 years we were together, I watched as she changed from school to school the importance of special education and identifying students with intellectual and developmental disabilities to ensure that their individual education plan, their IEP, or their 504 plan was accurate and was, that they worked closely with the parents and guardians of those children to ensure that they got the kind of education that they needed. I think that has suffered recently. Lynn worked on a program called Touch Math. It's a program that anybody's listening can find. It's a mathematics problem because some students with intellectual and development disabilities have real problems with mathematics. And this allows the tactile ability in addition to visual and auditory so that a numeral 5 has got 5 touch points, 9's got 9 touch points. And that Touch Math program is important, and I think parents and people that may be listening tonight ought to know about that. I think in the bullet points, the ones that jumped out to me, number 1 was, I do believe there's got to be more time for the general education teachers to be sensitive to special education needs. And I don't know where you find the funding, but you've got to find that funding. It's a priority. I also believe that classroom aides are critical for students so that they can receive education alongside their peer group and not be separated into closets and other rooms. I disagree a little bit on restorative justice. I got involved with restorative justice when I was on the District 11 school board, primarily to try and stop the high numbers of suspensions and expulsions for students, primarily in middle school. So I think it works at that level. I don't want to put students in rooms that are going to threaten teachers, but I think restorative justice is a program worth consideration, and it has been successful.
Thank you for all of those points. Other issues on education? Yes, Commissioner Vanderwerf.
Yes, thank you. I can speak on behalf of Commissioner Bremer and myself, and she's got some notes here talking about vocational training, skills training, and I previously was the chair of the board for the Pikes Peak Workforce Center, and she sits on that board now. And, you know, one of the reasons, one of the goals of education for anybody, whether you have disabilities or not, is to help you get a job. That allows you to have a measure of your own independence, and it's important. It gives you resources to help make decisions in your life. So the Workforce Center does actually hold job fairs for people with disabilities. They actually call them abilities career fairs. And, you know, I think something that's very important is no matter who you are, no matter what disability you might have, there's always something special about that person that can help a company achieve a goal in whatever that company is trying to do. And I know I just pulled up an example of this on the November of 2020 career fair, which was in the middle of COVID. They had 40 employers at the career fair, and they all specifically knew that they were going there and looking for people with disabilities with certain skills. So I think, you know, education is critically important. People need that. It's not just higher education, because there's plenty of great trades that are out there, and in many cases, depending on the college degree you get, the trades actually pay better. So, and I know that on several of these things, the Workforce Center does work with all kinds of organizations across the state. I have here, it says that they work with the Department of Labor and Employment, the Independence Center, Colorado Springs Utilities, both the city and the county they work with, Rocky Mountain ADA, and others. So they do that in collaboration with many other partners that produce this supportive environment to help people with disabilities, whatever they may be, get into a job so they can have resources to live their lives.
Thank you. Yes.
Education for many of our family members and loved ones with developmental disabilities doesn't end at 21. It needs to be focused at being lifelong. My son is 33 and he just learned our phone number, and thank heavens he did, because he wandered off the other day, 3/4 of a mile down the road, into a business, and he, for the first time in his life, said his phone number. And it just can't stop. It has to be constant. So we have to make sure that there's enough funding in the programs they're going to, that they can provide educational services, because it's personal safety and different things. It doesn't end at 21.
One of the points on the policy sheets talks about Senate Bill 16196, the pilot program. And I was over here looking up on my computer. This was a pilot program for offering higher education opportunities for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Sponsored in the House by Representative Landgraf, in the Senate by former Senator Cadman. If I'm not mistaken, I think UCCS is one of the pilot participants. I don't know much about the program other than it's up and running. I think Arapahoe Community College and UNC are also the members, the other institutions that are involved with that. So certainly if that issue comes up this year at the legislature, funding for that program or expanding that program, we'll make sure to connect with our legislators. Excuse me? Needs to be expanded to Pikes Peak. What a great idea for our legislators to work on. Thank you. You're now a lobbyist. I've demoted you.
Hey, Ed.
Yes.
I was going to say Colorado Inclusive Education is at Pikes Peak, and it's at UCCS, and so they are doing progressive education for individuals with IDD.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful to know, and it sounds like it's a good expansion. We got a comment from the chat. Touch Math is a perfect example of a program created for students in special education that benefits all students, and that is part of the reason inclusive education is so crucial to our future. So thank you for bringing that up. Kudos to your late wife for doing this and the impact that it has on down the generations. Thank you. Yep. Moving on, if there's no more on education, to just general issues with the COVID pandemic. Certainly the COVID pandemic has turned our world, many of our worlds, upside down. We've seen so many changes worldwide, but so for many issues, for people in the IDD community, really the isolation that has been felt because of a loss of jobs, bus service, transportation. It has really affected those individuals very hard. Direct staff support is very hard to come by. It's very hard for the service providers to hold on to their employees. The health issues for individuals with IDE that were a significant issue before COVID are now even more so. Education is oftentimes can be lacking for families on IEPs and 504s. Telehealth has been a benefit. I think it was mentioned before. I think Commissioner Vanderwerf mentioned the benefits of telehealth can allow people to live in different areas. That's been great. We need to continue to work for, as the commissioners are doing, making it accessible throughout the county, throughout all the counties and all the states. Other comments on just the general COVID atmosphere? Or other questions that the audience or the chat room may have? Senator Gardner.
Thank you, Ed. I think we could probably spend the next hour talking about COVID impacts in the context of IDD and providing services. I'm a practicing attorney when I'm not doing my legislative gig. Or I do them simultaneously is more accurate, and have the privilege to represent one CCB as well as some providers. And the challenges for them as employers, and I know this may not directly affect those of you who are clients, consumers, families, but be aware that the employment issues that your CCBs, your ARCs, your providers are facing are really challenging. The question of vaccination. There are some number of employees that do not wish to be mandatorily vaccinated, and yet that has been mandated, and we're talking about a group of people that are particularly vulnerable. How to implement that with medical exemptions and religious exemptions has been a challenge over the past several weeks and will continue to be. Some of you may have seen reported nationally the states that have mandated vaccines for healthcare workers and people in human services are having employees who say they're going to leave. I think that remains to be seen whether that really happens or not. I don't have a particular solution other than to say to all of you that this has been an issue that has impacted this community particularly hard. Going back to education, it is not a situation where most of these education services can be delivered over the internet. That's challenging for the average family to do. So we, as Mr. Durham said, getting people back to in-person situations in the best way we can, as quickly as we can, is going to have the most good for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. But we also have to be cognizant of the risk to them as well. So I don't have an answer, but that's kind of the problem.
Yep. Thank you. Back to the previous discussion about the college program, we did get in the chat room, thank you to the legislators for passing the Higher Education for Individuals with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. And the comment is from a parent of a four-year student in the program. So that's great to hear. Our friend Colin, you have a comment. We'll go up to you in the sky.
Great, thanks, Ed. I think I wanted to echo what Senator Gardner said, is that there is an absolute crisis right now within the direct care workforce, with our direct support professionals and individuals across the continuum of care trying to meet the gaps right now. We're hearing anywhere from a 20 to 40% vacancy rate. And so what we've done, for those of you familiar, and I'll post it here in the chat, but within the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA as we call it, there was a section 9817 that gave an additional federal match or matching funds to Colorado Medicaid to spend on home and community-based services. So ultimately what that looked like for us is about $530 million worth of monies coming into the state for us to spend directly on services for kind of recovery of the COVID pandemic, but also putting together, I think, a thoughtful approach towards trying to innovate. How can we move the needle, and how can we put these programs and move them towards the 21st century, look at new ways for technology to come into play. But the single biggest area of spend that we're focusing on is in the direct care workforce area, and that's over $280 million, 260 of which will be going directly to providers, direct care workers or direct support professionals, and many others in the system. And so while that's not going to solve the problem immediately, we hope it's going to at least bring some balance to what is the crisis right now. But we are looking forward to having this session start, being able to have some additional conversations. As I mentioned, I'll post this in the chat, but we have over 72 different projects that we're hoping to move the needle on disability services in Colorado. So I'd encourage you all to take a look how that may impact you, your family member, your family. But at the end of the day, we're very excited and we're looking for input as to how these projects work. So let us know.
Thank you, Colin, and we really appreciate you being here tonight, knowing you've probably had a long day, working for the department, but being here is very helpful. We had another question, a different type of question from the chat room. Question for any panelist. What policies, procedures, or legislation is being considered, in your knowledge, to address how law enforcement interacts with people with disabilities and mental health differences? And I think that could be for any level of government. Representative Pico.
Thank you. Well, this past legislative session, we did pass, in fact, a bill that provides the option for people with developmental or any kind of disability to have that added to their driver's license, ID card, so that if a police makes a stop for any reason, they get that information. So they understand that a non-responsive person is actually deaf, for example, or some other issue. So that is in there, and those sorts of things are always being considered.
I appreciate that, and I think there was another bill, but I can't remember if it passed, about providing training for the state's post board, so that there would be a training component for people getting certified as law enforcement officers. But I can't remember if that passed, and maybe, yes, go ahead, Representative Carver.
Thank you, Ed. And I wasn't going to respond to that because I also don't, my recollection is that may not have made it to the finish line. But for several sessions, and we dealt with this in the 2021 session, to expand funding support for local police departments to have what's called co-responder teams, which we did touch on earlier this evening, where you have those who are trained in behavioral health, mental health issues, social services, to be responding with law enforcement to a situation, so that and we have found those what are called co-responder teams to be very, very effective. First, in providing more expertise in addressing situations, those with IDD or mental health issues, at a lower level, de-escalation techniques and the expertise they bring to that. And so I will say that when this topic initially came up in the JBC Joint Budget Committee to expand funding for this, there was a very unfortunate debate about forcing police departments to take it out of their own budgets. And that, of course, was the wrong answer, especially given where we see crime rates and other public safety issues going on in Colorado. The right approach, which ultimately the legislature did support, was to expand funding, not as much as we needed, and we need to do more, but to expand funding for local police departments so that they can add more teams that can now be dispatched in these situations.
Thank you. Yes, Councilor.
Thanks, Ed. Again, Tom Strand from City Council, at-large member. About a year ago, we created in City Council an organization called LETAC. It's the Law Enforcement Transparency Accessibility Commission. And they came up, they studied a lot of the things with CSPD, Colorado Springs Police Department, in terms of responding to issues in the community that involve behavioral health issues, that involve domestic relations issues. We currently have 2 CRT teams. They are the crisis response teams. And this LETAC team is now recommended to us for our budget for 22 to add another team. The teams are made up of a police officer who is trained with behavioral health issues and dealing with domestic relations issues, as well as a social worker trained in behavioral health, and a paramedic. And so we put these teams together specifically to answer that question when we go out into the community, to be more capable of dealing with behavioral health issues.
Thank you. Commissioner.
Yes, thank you. And it's been mentioned a couple of times, but I actually would like to provide some of the statistics for the beacon units. These are the co-responder teams. And what this does is it pairs for the El Paso County, we have 2 beacon units. It pairs a sheriff's deputy with a behavioral health specialist, and we're using, I think we're using UC Health right now. It was started in 2018, and in August of 2020, those 2 teams responded to 396 mental health calls. 99% of them were diverted from the jail. They produce a de-escalation process at the scene that really, really reduces incarceration rates from people that are suffering from mental health, and they're having a bad moment in their lives at that point in time. So it says here, last fiscal year, and I think that was 2019, as we were growing the program, but it's been growing monthly, they responded to 780 calls. Now, here's one thing that I think is really, these things are great. These were funded by the state legislature, and I can tell you that El Paso County is grateful for this process, but it is a 5-year, to my understanding, it's a 5-year pilot program, and we're very concerned about sustaining the program. I think that's a big concern of ours. I would encourage us to work together to figure out how to get something like this permanently funded, because it's doing amazing things here, and I think it needs to be expanded. I think we have 3 in El Paso County. Fountain has 1. El Paso County has 2, and I think there are other municipalities considering adding additional units also.
Okay, Senator Gardner.
Yes, thank you, Ed. Representative Carver alluded to this about the legislation that was under consideration this year. Got caught up in the defund the police debate. Now, if you listen to my local government colleagues, they mentioned when these things started, and they started in 2018. In my time serving on the Judiciary Committee in the General Assembly, the advocates for this kind of approach have always been law enforcement, first and foremost. The deputies and the officers and their leadership have come to us and said, we deal with not just problems of crime, but large numbers of social problems, whether it be mental health issues, all sorts of those issues. And it has been, to me, one of the frustrations that what have been really good strides forward have really been impeded a bit by the defund debate. What we need to do is fund more and better and train more and better, and at the expense of getting on the soapbox a little bit, overwhelmingly, your law enforcement officers throughout the state and throughout the country want exactly what you and I want, which is safe communities where the rights of citizens are respected, where you know that those problems that are really human services problems are not dealt with in the jail, but in hospitals and other places. So I just want to encourage everybody, when you have that discussion, and I think our questioner certainly is there, talk about the law enforcement as being your ally in this debate and in this discussion, because they are. That's what they want. That's what they want for their communities as much as all of us do.
Thank you. And we had one comment from the chat about this. Law enforcement should be required to go through specific training on how to work with people with IDE and learn specific wording to determine if persons are receiving services from TRE or other various organizations. One specific comment about the El Paso County CRT, they say will no longer respond to individuals if you are going through a mental health crisis. CRT has specifically stated they will no longer respond to my individual because it is a behavioral issue. Again, that was just coming from the chat room on city. Okay, yeah. So, yes, council member.
Then, so Dave Donaldson, I'm a city councilman from District 1, and I think the positive in that would mean if that individual has already been identified as not needing law enforcement response, then it would be fire department. It would be a paramedic that would go there, and I think what we've talked about is making sure it doesn't turn into an arrest. So in a way that may not be a problem.
Yep, thank you. At this point, unless there are further questions from the audience, I would like to say thank you to all of our elected officials. This is a very tough job, any of the jobs that these individuals do. You're not in office to make a big pile of money. You're not in office to spend more time with your family, because certainly you're all out doing these sorts of events in your state. And to those who are legislators, it is a very tough job driving up I-25 back and forth all day long, all week long, all winter long. So first of all, I have a lot of respect for anybody who's willing to put their name forward. This is an issue, these issues we've discussed tonight, they're nonpartisan. And we really do have a very thoughtful group of local government officials, state officials. Colin, we appreciate you being here as well. I think we've made a lot of progress in the last 15 years. I'll look at Senator Gardner and Representative Landgraf, who I've known the longest of anybody here. We've made a lot of progress, but there are always more issues to work on, and we need to make even more progress in the next few years. At this point, if our elected officials can stick around and if members of the audience would like to chat, I would encourage that. But other than that, thank you for attending the 15th annual town hall meeting tonight, and thanks to all of our sponsors tonight.